So next we have a concentration of expertise on our final panel discussion titled, and this was Rick Cable's title, friends. So landscape scale projects go big. That's right. Thank you, Rachel, for your support. During this discussion, we hope to hear about several successful project solutions to overcoming barriers and incentives to advance watershed work. Here to introduce our panelists and to moderate this panel is Chris Treese, retired manager of external affairs for the Colorado River District Club 20 Water Committee co-chair and enduring water geek. Please welcome Chris to the stage.
Thank you, Christian. As I make the introductions for both the panel and the panelists, may I invite the panelists to come up, join us in our fireside chat format. Please, they should be comfortable. Nobody in the audience falls asleep, however. This is our final panel, first and final panel for today. And it is the go big and go home. This is the lessons learned. This is the challenge to all of you to take the lessons from yesterday and what is going to be discussed today and implement these activities and implement them and think big. Look at landscape scales. I will provide a brief introduction to each of our panelists in the order in which they will speak. Panelists, I'll ask you to just simply hand the microphones back and forth, and then questions. There will be time for questions afterward, so make notes of your questions and we will get to you. Let's see, and that's pretty much everything for now. So we will start. Frank Beum, who you heard from yesterday. Frank is the regional forester for the Rocky Mountain region, where he leads the stewardship of 22 million acres of national forests and grasslands with partners and 48 affiliated tribes in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wyoming. He's worked on 7 national forests and 5 ranger districts in the Rocky Mountain and Southern regions, as well as the Southern Regional Office, as well as DC office. After Frank, Elvy Barton joins us from Phoenix. Elvy is the Forest Health Principal with the Salt River Project in Arizona. Salt River Project water is delivered to 2 million residents and irrigates 8.3 million acres of land in northern and eastern Arizona. And the watersheds that provide this critical water supply are in desperate need of restoration. SRP, Salt River Project, is working with the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, the state of Arizona, to develop a 20-year program to remove small trees that create fuel, ladder fuel for wildfires, and to restore watershed health. She is also a member of the adjunct faculty at Northern Arizona University. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from Arizona State. Christina Burri joins us from Denver Water. Christina is a friend we've heard from previously, not this program, but on previous Club 20 activities. Christina is the first ever watershed scientist hired at Denver Water, working to inventory, protect, and improve 2.5 million acre watershed in Denver Water's collection system on both Colorado's east and west slopes. She leads Denver Water's innovative watershed management and planning efforts, including forest health investments. Christina also manages the From Forest to Faucets partnership, a $66 million agreement between Denver Water, the U.S. Forest Service, Colorado State Forest Service, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to improve the health of Colorado forests and Colorado's watersheds. Batting cleanup. Matt McCombs, also heard from yesterday, recently appointed Colorado State Forester. Matt's career has spanned both natural resource and forest management, beginning as an aide to Senators Ken Salazar and John Tester. Matt is also a veteran, having been deployed into Iraq in 2003 as a combat medic with the Colorado Army National Guard and serving as a medical service officer in the Montana Air National Guard, where he achieved the rank of captain before leaving that service in 2012. Matt takes the lead at the Colorado State Forest Service following his time as district ranger for the 1.3 million acre Gunnison Ranger District. So with those introductions, Frank, if you can lead off, and do you have the, or do I have the clicker? You would like.
Yeah. Super, thank you. Great, thank you, and great to be back with you again today. Just a couple of opening comments before I get into talking about the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Pat Dorsey, one of our really fantastic partners with National Wild Turkey Federation, Director of Conservation Operations in Western Region. Pat, you in the room? She's not. Okay. Well, one reason I wanted to bring up Pat was if you guys stump me with really hard questions, I may phone a friend. But the other reason is they've got a table out there and a little flyer on RMRI that's going to pretty much capture all the points I'm going to talk about. So if you know, there's something out there you can pick up if you're interested. So and the other piece I want to touch on real quick in reflection from Senator Bennett's comments, which are really good. The piece about water, it got me thinking about our Forest Service history and just a really quick snapshot of Forest Service history. So our forest reserves were created by Congress in 1891. The Forest Service itself was created through the Transfer Act in 1905, transferred the forest reserves from the Department of Interior into USDA and created the Forest Service. But 1897 is what's called the Organic Act. We still refer to that as the Organic Act. That Congress passed it, and it declared basically the initial intent of the forest reserves. And I'm going to read you real quick what those are. Many of you may be familiar with this, but the intent of Congress creating these forest reserves was to improve and protect the forests within the reservation, securing favorable flows of water, favorable conditions of water flows, and to furnish a continuous supply of timber for the use and necessities of the citizens of the United States. Now, Congress has passed a few laws since then, and they don't, and some of them are conflicting. And so we've got a lot of laws that have been passed since then, giving us additional direction. But I just want to tie back to our original Organic Act, and the importance of water has always been there within our mission, even before we were created as the Forest Service. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. It went up there. Oh, there we go. Good. So this is just real quick summary of what the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative is about. You see, problem for all, takes all to solve. That's sort of the bottom line. And kind of what I talked about yesterday, sort of my bottom line up front. It's a big problem. We got to all be together to solve it. I will say, you know, the RMRI, and I'll get into some of the history of it here in a minute, but it really is designed to bring all of us together. It's co-led, the initiative co-led by the Forest Service and the National Wild Turkey Federation. I'll speak to that a bit more. 40 plus major national, state, and private organizations have joined the effort. And it really is a pilot that was established several years ago. Now, I'll say, let me back up. Part of the reason it was created in Colorado was because of Colorado's really strong history and collaboration. You know, this has been happening for a long time in Colorado. Because of that, the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative was started to build upon that. So that's just a really quick summary. So about us here, there we go. So vision and mission. So the mission, again, increase the resilience of our forests, wildlife habitats, communities, recreation opportunities, and water resources of all lands across the Rockies. Broad statement. We'll talk a little bit more about some focused work here in a minute. But the four values that unite us, and you'll see this on an upcoming screen. Number one is water, 2, forests and wildlife, 3, communities, and 4, recreation. So kind of a broad scope, but water is really a key component of this. So I'll get into, there are 3 landscapes that we've landed within Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. Southwest Colorado, which is the Marquee Project, and you'll see a map here in a bit on that, as well as the Upper Arkansas and the Upper South Platte. So with that, and the other thing I'll mention here is those 40 organizations I mentioned, over 170 partners, again, guided by those 4 shared values: water, healthy forests and wildlife, robust recreation, resilient communities. Getting ready to say next, but I think that's me. All right, so here is the map of those 3 landscapes I mentioned. Again, southern Colorado, southwest Colorado around the San Juan National Forest. I'll speak mostly to that today as a description of kind of how we, the big we within partnership, are going big, but I'll also touch a little bit on the Upper Arkansas and the Upper South Platte projects. So as I mentioned, yep, there's our values. So again, to ensure clean drinking water is available for local communities and downstream beneficiaries. We've talked a lot about that here. Again, the recreation piece, creating accessible, inclusive, and sustainable recreation opportunities. Forest and wildlife, foster healthy, functioning forests to support suitable wildlife habitat, and guide people in communities so they're prepared. This is something that Matt talked about. How are we going to be prepared to receive funds when they're available? That's one of the intent of RMRI, is to help guide communities so they're prepared for the threat and potential impacts of wildfire, but also how to get ahead of it is the theme of this this meeting. So there's the subcommittees. So the 6 subcommittees, won't get into a lot of detail here, but in December of 2019, RMI partners. So this is very much a partner-led effort, a stakeholder-led effort. Stakeholders identified those 3 landscapes I showed you. Stakeholders identified these subcommittees and the work that's going forward. So December of 2019, partners identified the landscape and the landscapes, and also identified the 6 cross-cutting issues and assigned subcommittees to each one of them. Biomass utilization, we talk about that a lot. We've got, what are we going to do with all of Colorado's unmerchantable wood? Big issue. Workforce capacity. How are we going to staff up to do this work, both internally, and how are we going to leverage the work with our partners? Where we're going to find the money, funding, the governance, how we're going to manage this thing. That social license and communication, how to generate public buy-in, that's really important. And I hear this from our secretary all the time. As important as the work that we're doing is, and it's vitally important, it's almost just as important how we tell our story, because that's going to make a difference going forward. So those are the subcommittees. Let's see what's up here next. Okay, you saw this slide already. I won't spend a lot of time here. Talked a little bit about it yesterday, but so our shared, just to recap a little bit, the Forest Service initiated our shared stewardship strategy in 2018 to really change our paradigm, how we work with partners to really be at the table at the beginning to design projects. 2019, you've already heard this, Governor of Colorado signed a shared stewardship agreement with USDA that works on forestry, but also recreation. So the pillars here, again, working at scale, big problems require big solutions. And thanks, Rick, for the, kind of the title of this piece. So we need to work at scale. Thank you. So we need to work at scale. And I will say just a little quick note on this. As Andrew talked yesterday about a project on the Bighorn that I can't remember exactly, maybe it was 10 or 15% of that watershed. So it doesn't always have to be hugely at scale, but it has to be in the right place at the right time. So when we talk about scale, and we do clearly talk about it at the landscape level, but we also have to identify the right place to make a difference. So that's work at scale. Cross-boundary solutions, we know our work is beyond our boundaries clearly, and the key, again, joint priority setting. We need to work together to identify the priorities, and that's a keystone of what's happening within RMRI. Let's see, what do we got next? Okay, so there we go. There's the map of RMRI Southwest, and it is the marquee landscape within the initiative. The partners unanimously selected Southwest Colorado as the first place to focus collective efforts. So why? It comprises rural landscapes, we know that, linked by transportation corridors, power lines, and water. It encompasses about 700,000 acres stretching 120 miles along Colorado Highway 160, including the towns of Cortez, Dolores, Mancos, Durango, and the San Juan National Forest. almost the Rio Grande, but kind of over at the San Juan. So why here? Project situated within a forested landscape with a large ponderosa pine component. Fire suppression has led to dense overstock forest there, like everywhere. Forest products industry has increased within the area, providing a viable economic driver for our work, and critical water resources are in the area. So that's kind of the why we landed on that particular landscape. So what have we done? What are some of the accomplishments? There we go. So anyhow, we've treated almost 30,000 acres within. So the intent here is to treat 290,000 acres on National Forest System, another 20,000 acres on private. So far, we're almost 30,000 acres treated, almost 500 homes protected, and you can see 15,000. Let's see, I don't have that slide. I got to turn around. Sorry, 15,440 acres there. So anyhow, lots of achievements already. We're just starting, but that's some of our accomplishments. That's combined both federal and non-federal. Let me go to the next slide. You get a little bit different picture here of our, so you see the big tall bar, that's, you know, at the end of 10 years, we hope to treat 300, a little over 300,000 acres, and we're on a trajectory to do that. So the next piece will give you a little picture of what that looks like within both our goal, our 10-year goal on National Forest System. We're a little ahead of the curve, a little bit behind on private, but we expect that we're going to meet our 10-year goal. We're on a good trajectory to meet our goals, and it's really exciting to do this work again with partners. It's partner led, and we're actually getting work done on the ground. Next slide, I think, is just a real quick snapshot of the Upper Arkansas project. Again, this was secondary. This project includes Lake and Chaffee counties, headwaters to Colorado's largest river basin, providing drinking water for over 1 million people. We know the Arkansas River is the most rafted in the country, and the project area hosts over 4 million visitors a year from across the U.S. and around the world. So that's partly why we're focused on the Upper Arkansas. Some good work happening there. Won't recap. I just kind of wanted to focus on the Southwest, but I wanted to give you a picture of 2 of the other landscapes. The next is the Upper South Platte. And in this one, we're looking at treating up to, let's see, we've got Upper South Platte watershed, 885,000 acres, 2,600 square miles extending from Denver metro area to Kenosha Pass. So large landscape here, partly in the western slope, has over 3 million visits, including gold medal trout fisheries. So that's our third project area. I'm not really getting into what we're doing there, but that's our third focus area. So the next piece, and I'd like to share with you, is, again, telling our story. And this is, I'm about to wrap up here, but this piece is just so important. We've got to be able to tell our story, because this is a way that we get public buy-in through information exchange. We build understanding of what it is, why we're cutting trees if we're cutting trees, why we're doing prescribed burning, why we're doing thinning, all of that. It's just so important to be able to tell our story. You know, when we share our stories, we generate their buy-in. We hope we do. We may not get everybody, but it's really important, again, to be able to do that, and helps mobilize our support. And the piece here about the RMRI effect, we really do hope that that's in play. When we share our stories, we hope that it inspires and catalyzes other projects and other landscapes across Colorado and the West. So that's kind of the intent of why we tell our stories. It's just so important. So with that, I think that's the last one. That's the last one. So again, RMRI is welcome to all. We're working very hard in those landscapes, again, in a shared partnership way. So thanks, and happy to answer questions later.
Frank, if you would hand the microphone and the, oh, no, Elvy's got it. Good. But give her the clicker if you would, please.
Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background about SRP before we start kicking into the slides. So Salt River Project is a federal reclamation project located in the Phoenix metropolitan area. SRP is a water and power provider, which most people don't recognize that we have also a water component as well. They always ask me, what is a power provider so interested in forest restoration? So I have to explain we're also a water provider. And as a water provider, we manage 7 dams and reservoirs on 3 different watersheds within the state of Arizona. We deliver 250,000 acre feet of water to over 2 million residents in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And that water that we deliver every year comes from 8.3 million acres of forested watershed in northern and central Arizona. And that is why we care so much about our forests. So what we have noticed over the last couple decades is that we are seeing an increased risk from the wildfires. So since the 1990s, we have seen a 10-fold increase in the number and severity of fires across the watersheds that deliver the water to our residents. In addition to the amount of fires and the severity of those, we have also seen experienced 7 mega fires. So those are fires over 100,000 acres in each over our watershed since 2002. And this is an unprecedented thing that has never occurred in previous history in these watersheds, these 100,000 plus acre wildfires. Some of them have even been well over 500,000 acres. One of the things that we know from our partners, and specifically the water that we provide to the municipalities downstream, is that these large wildfires are having devastating impacts on their water treatment capabilities, and also just in the communities that are surrounding, that are located in the forested areas. So some of the impacts that do occur from these large wildfires. So we are seeing the community and property damages. So I'm sure that you all are no stranger to these type of impacts where, you know, not only is it the when you have to pack up and evacuate, those type of community impacts, but it's also the impacts on their properties, their businesses, their livelihoods, the infrastructure that is located in those cities. And that is not something that is easily rebuilt or very quickly rebuilt. On the power side, we have noticed that these fires not only damage the power infrastructure, so you're talking about the poles, the transmission lines, but what is even more important is that during the fire season, it's also the hottest part of the year for the Phoenix metropolitan area. And when wildfires occur near these transmission and distribution lines, the smoke actually trips out those lines, and therefore it reduces our ability to bring power into the cities. And when it's 115, that is probably one of the greatest impacts. And so what happens is we actually, as a power provider, have to go onto the market and buy other power supplies at outrageous cost just to make sure that we can keep the power on for our customers. Because no one as a utility likes to turn off the power in 115 degrees at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. For the water infrastructure side, what we have noticed is that there are increased sedimentation and ash and debris being deposited in our reservoirs, which is our lifeline in the valley because we're a desert area. And when you fill up our reservoirs with sediment, you're reducing our long-term storage capacity, where we store water year over year and we slowly release it. So that way we have ensure we have a reliable supply for the valley. And so not only is it ruining our long-term water storage supply, it also is impacting our dam infrastructure, where a lot of this big material is coming in contact with our dams. And we also have hydropower in those dams as well. And so it hurts our ability to continue generating hydropower as well. Now, the water quality is definitely an issue, but as a raw water provider, it really falls upon our municipalities that we deliver water to. This is the picture up there is an example of a fire that actually hit below our reservoirs. And so we weren't able to hold back that water, and it just went straight into the delivery system. And the water bottle on the right-hand side is what the water that came off of a burn scar was going into our municipal water treatment facilities. They actually had to bypass that water because it was untreatable at that point. We met with one of our recent municipalities, and they said that they've had to install over $200 million in new water infrastructure, treatment infrastructure to handle the organics that are coming off of these burn scars. And so these wildfires are having direct impacts on our municipalities. Then on the carbon and air pollution, we have a lot of sensitive populations, and these wildfires are releasing large amounts of carbon and also air pollutants that do affect those sensitive populations and throughout Arizona. And then lastly, but not equally as important, is the wildlife and the habitat that is impacted across the watersheds. And we have a lot of endangered, threatened, and special status species throughout Arizona that we all have obligations to ensure that we can continue their the livelihood of not only the species, but also their habitats in these forested areas. And so one of the challenges that we have experienced, some of the challenges we have experienced in Arizona is that the just sheer amount of restoration work that has to occur. So in Arizona, we have about 1 million acres across 5 national forests that need to be restored over the next 20 years. Another challenge is that we do have limited forest product industry capacity, meaning we only have a certain number of industry players in Arizona, and they are capped out at restoring 15,000 acres per year. On the other side of that is we also have limited forest product markets, and that the products that they are creating have a lower value. So one of the things that we are very much interested in is how we generate new markets and bring new markets to Arizona. Of course, drought, disease, insect infestations, and climate change are not only magnifying the problem, because you already have all overstocked forest, but when you have trees that are stressed because you have ongoing prolonged droughts, increased temperatures, it stresses those trees more, insects comes in, disease comes in, you have increased more tree mortality, which is just magnifying the problem for us. And then finally, sorry, we have U.S. Forest Service's long-term funding, resources, and priorities is also a challenge for us as well. I will note that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has brought renewed life to the Forest Service's ability to put down payments on these projects and invest in their resources. But long-term, it still is a continued problem moving forward. So some of the solutions that SRP has used more in the coming years, and we are investing in moving forward, are long-term funding mechanisms, and to really leverage not only our federal partners' dollars, but also our state and our NGO ability and our corporate funding as well, to really bring together this pot of funding that can really help us fund long-term. So for example, one of them is the SRP Healthy Forest Initiative, which is our customer donation program. So our customers are able to donate $3 a month on their electric bill, and we sponsor up to $200,000. So we match up to that within SRP. And then we take those funds together and we invest in forest restoration projects along with the watershed. And this has been a very, we just launched this program in November of 2020. And we've actually been receiving a lot of recognition for it, not only from our customers, but I think we've also recognized that our non-customers are also donating. So I get checks from people who are not even within our water or electric power service territory, who just think this is the right thing to do and want to participate. The other long-term funding mechanism that we are looking at is pairing up carbon and water benefits as a way to attract corporate investment. And so we have been involved in long-term modeling efforts with Arizona State University and the Spatial Informatics Group that can quantify not only the net carbon benefits from removing trees off of landscapes, which I know sounds very counterintuitive, but it works. But we have also built a forest hydrology model with Arizona State University that actually quantifies the water benefits in terms of acre feet from thinning forest. So we look at the existing conditions, we apply the Forest Service's prescriptions, and then we compare the two, and we can quantify the water benefits associated with projects before they occur. So then the next piece is we're really moving forward towards long-term landscape partnerships. And this is an example of where we recently have signed 2 MOUs with the Forest Service and our state forester. Each of them are for 10 years. And one of them is to restore one whole watershed to do 31,000 acres of thinning over the next 10 years. The other one is in a national forest, and it actually covers 2 different watersheds, and it's to do 45,000 acres of thinning over the next 10 years. And we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, knowing that we have approximately another 500,000 acres across the 3 watersheds that we are interested in that need to be restored. So, but this is our first effort on moving forward with these type of partnerships that are focused on long-term collaboration and restoration. And then finally, from SRP's perspective, we know that none of the work can get done on the ground without our forest product industry being healthy and sustainable. They are our implementing arm, and without them, we wouldn't be able to get any of this work done. And so we know in Arizona that we have to support and grow our forest product industry, which means we need to attract new industry, and we also need to expand the markets of what we can do with that material that's coming off of our forest. And one of the key things here is, since Arizona is primarily National Forest Service lands, we have very little private and state lands. The Forest Service is the key piece to that support and growing forest product industry, because they have the ability and the tools to ensure a consistent supply of material to industry. And when we know that industry needs consistent long-term supplies in order to be sustainable over the long term. And that's it. And I wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Elvy. Christina, do you have a live mic yet?
Yes, thank you.
Again? Thank you.
Yes.
Good.
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you. So I want to thank Club 20 for this summit. This is an exciting time for watershed and forest health, and especially this time for collaboration for forest and watershed health. Hearing from the leaders on this panel and hearing from the leaders in all the sessions for the summit, I've just learned so much, and I think there's a lot of momentum moving forward. And I just really also appreciate the power that Club 20 has to elevate these issues and continues to do so. So just want to recognize Club 20 for that. Thank you. So I'm a watershed scientist for Denver Water. I've been with Denver Water for about 6 years, and the watershed scientist position was new when I started at Denver Water. So my charge when I first started there was to build a brand new watershed planning program, building upon the success of our forest health partnerships. So Denver Water has been funding forest health and forest health commitments. Oop, went too far. For over 30 years. Denver Water owns about 60,000 acres in the state of Colorado, and the State Forest Service has been our forester managing our lands for over 30 years. So you can see the outline of just my brief presentation today. I want to talk about just the holistic watershed planning program that I manage and Denver Water's forest health commitments and the history and background, as well as the lessons learned and the return on investment. Thank you, Matt. The lessons learned after we've been investing in our forests and the watershed, and the return on investment for why it's a smart business decision for Denver Water and water utilities to invest in forest and watershed health. So before launching into my main point of the presentation, which is from Forest to Faucets partnership, I do want to highlight this new watershed planning program that We're building at Denver Water. So wildfire risk is our #1 risk to our water supplies. So certainly a big component of the program is forest health and wildfire risk mitigation. But we're long-range planners. So when you're thinking about protecting our dams and our infrastructure, we're thinking 300 years out. So we have a holistic watershed planning program that is looking really long range in terms of our planning horizon. And we also have very specific action items and plans for just more smaller pieces of the greater watershed, because our watersheds, even though they are divided east-west slope, they're very unique in terms of their geology and hydrology. And so we have specific action items and projects that we implement. And then the kind of like the splat in the middle is post-fire recovery. So I have a really small team. It's just me and 2 other watershed scientists. And we have to drop everything when a fire occurs in the watershed. I'm sure you all understand. So to orient you a little bit to Denver Water's water supply watersheds, over half, so over 54% is national forests. We work with 3 national forests, and it's about 2.5 million acres. And certainly healthy forests equals healthy watersheds in terms of infrastructure protection. So thinking about protecting our dams, our diversions, certainly water quality going into our water treatment plants, as well as community and environmental stewardship. So those are the 3 principles of our watershed planning program. So what motivated Denver Water to start investing in forest and watershed health was incurring the costs after 2 fires. One was the Hayman fire, which you see the burn scar in this photo, in 2002, and a fire that was known as the Buffalo Creek Fire in 1996. And so Denver Water spent about $28 million in recovery following those fires. Of that $28 million, Denver Water spent $18.5 million on dredging Strontia Springs Reservoir, which is where 80% of Denver Water's water supply comes from, as well as 90% of Aurora Water's water supply. So very critical reservoir for water utilities on the Front Range. And the dredging occurred in about 2013, so cost a lot of money for Denver Water. And because of the location of the fires and the size and severity, those watersheds haven't recovered. And so we're still, even after we spent that money on dredging, we're still having to deal with a sediment that continuously moves into Strontia Springs. And just like Elvy talked about, there's considerations for dam safety. So certainly storage, yes, but also thinking about protecting the dam for 300 years out, because it's very difficult to try to build a new dam. And so it's so important to quantify the value of protecting the infrastructure that you have. And so even though Denver Water spent $28 million after those fires, we're still incurring costs today. And we just recognize that it's a smart business decision to invest in proactive investments. So I have this slide to show you the difference versus 1900 around Cheeseman Reservoir, one of the reservoirs in our South Platte collection system, versus 2002. This was right before the Hayman fire. So you can see definitely the huge difference in the landscapes. And what we're trying to achieve through Forest to Faucets is restoring the forests to become like they were 100 years ago, where they're very ecologically departed right now. I like this image. This is by the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. It's a really nice way of showing what we're trying to achieve through the From Forest to Faucets partnership. And so you can see the very top, very overcrowded, lots of fuel, lots of species where the needles and branches are low to the ground. And so through the forest restoration techniques that the U.S. Forest Service implements, as well as the State Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they're restoring the forest so that way there's different species, different age classes. It's better for wildlife. You can see the stump for wildlife. So I like this image and just showing exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve through forest restoration. So a little bit more specific about the partnership. It is a $66 million investment among all the partners. Denver Water has committed $33 million so far, and that's matched dollar for dollar by our partners. And it's about 14 cents per month for a customer for Denver Water. So we serve about 1.5 million people. And in doing the math, it's about 14 cents per month. And it's not, I think one point that one of the speakers yesterday with Coca-Cola made was having some of the flexibility from the water utility being detached from city council. And I think that is a big component for why Denver Water has been able to commit so much financially to this, is we have our own independent board and our customers, their bills go right to paying for our programs at Denver Water. And so we don't have to compete with the other utilities within the city and county of Denver because we have our own independent budget and board. So I think that has been helpful in getting the funding commitments for this program. We are excited. We're looking to the next 5 years. So we've been doing this for 10 years and it's been a huge success. And so we are looking in years 10 through 15 now. And so we're preparing a memorandum of understanding among all the partners that you see, as well as including the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, as they've been doing monitoring for the effectiveness of the treatments, as well as a return on investment study to quantify the benefits. So sharing some success stories. You see this photo here. This was in 2018. This was the 64A fire that occurred on the Pike National Forest. And this was an area that was thinned. You can see the thin ponderosa pine trees. The thinning allowed the fire basically to drop to the ground, and the local fire responders were able to access the fire safely and suppress it. So that's a really great success story. And in 2020, which was a terrible wildfire season, we did have success with some treatments in the Upper South Platte watershed that enabled fire responders to access and suppress a fire that was just upstream of Strontia Springs Reservoir, which is a really critical area for us. So we have many stories like this. Those are just a couple. Certainly the thinning that the State Forest Service did around our facilities at Cheeseman Reservoir right before the Hayman fire occurred saved those facilities. So we have a lot of these stories. So thinking about telling your story, we have a lot of those, and I'm happy to be a spokesperson and provide examples for you. It is really powerful. Another success story in Summit County, they were recognized with the Chief's Honor Award for the collaborative work that was going on in the county. This is the Peak 7 project, and many partners at the table for this. You see in the photo of the Ponzi machine, which I know is a funny name for it. But there's 2 of these in the state of Colorado, and why this is so successful, and I wanted to highlight it, is this area is really steep, really critical for Denver Water's water supply, but also really critical for community protection in Summit County. And so because of this new innovative machine, they were able to treat these steep slopes. So this was a really exciting story, and just really thrilled that the county and all the partners received this award from the Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. So some lessons learned since we've been doing this for 10 years In the early years, we treated a lot of easy acres. They were alongside roads, they were easy to access, they were cheaper. But in terms of looking at risk reduction for Denver Water based on Denver Water's values at risk, they weren't, even though they were cheaper, they weren't the biggest bang for the buck. And so really where the treatment goes, it truly matters based on your value at risk that you're trying to protect. The type of treatment matters. So thinking about strategic treatments rather than a shotgun approach, having contiguous treatments, getting to the scale that you need in order to truly change the outcome on the landscape when a fire occurs. Maintenance. So we've seen in some of the early treatments, especially like in Summit County, Grand County, where little baby lodgepole pines are really prolific. And so maintaining those investments is really important. And I think that was something really important to get across to Denver Water in terms of their leadership and thinking about long range planning and budgeting, is that it's not something that we can just throw a bunch of money at and walk away. We have to maintain that investment into the future in order for it to be successful. And finally, through the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute study, the return on investment study, we are seeing a significant return on investment for the treatments, the projects that are in those areas that matter. So the return on investment isn't like a one number thing. It is a range, and it's a range based on where the treatment was in relation to values at risk. So on the upper end of the return on investment, Denver Water is experiencing about a $240 million return on investment in those strategic locations. Oh, and that was my last one. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Matt, bring us home.
So in the spirit of storytelling, I'm going to share with you a story of everything working. And instead of me telling it to you, it's a story that some of you have heard and seen, but I think it's absolutely worth seeing again because it speaks to exactly the kind of things that we've just been talking about, and actually really, I think will very efficiently sort of tie all of these conversations together. But there's a few themes I want you to think about as you're consuming this video. Number one is we need to act with a sense of urgency. If this is a crisis, we need to respond like it's a crisis. And number two, we have to bring all the resources and all the people to the table so that we can go big, but also stay big. And lastly, you've got to share your success, your unique story, so that we can incentivize others to engage and bring themselves into action as well. And then lastly, this is the most important one. Forestry is and should be portrayed as the beautiful thing that it is in action. So without further ado, a story of everything working.
Is really a story of everything working. In the fall of 2019, our Forest Health Protection Unit in the National Forest identified an outbreak of mountain pine beetle. And you know, mountain pine beetle is a natural part of the ecosystem. They are endemic to the forests all over the state of Colorado and across the Intermountain West, and they serve a natural role. But when they get to that epidemic or outbreak level, they can become a very impactful species. And we have an incredibly large population of lodgepole pine here in the Taylor Basin that is really the last of the unaffected lodgepole forests in the state of Colorado. Many folks in the, if you're from Colorado or you visit Colorado frequently, have experienced the mass mortality events on the I-70 corridor and Highway 40 going up towards Steamboat. And we're set up for a very similar experience if this outbreak went unchecked. And so as soon as the district found this out last fall, we immediately began planning to respond as rapidly as we can. But the uniqueness of this project is that beetles don't know boundaries.
The beetle is spreading so quickly because, first of all, we have these large, mature, overcrowded pine forests that haven't had a lot of forest management. And so basically, They are all the same forest type. They're all the same height. Most of them are the same diameter. They all grew up together. And for a bark beetle, that's like this beautiful buffet because, you know, if you had aspen and Doug fir and spruce intermixed in there, plus different age classes, then it makes it a lot harder for that bark beetle to get around and find the right hosts. When you just have this contiguous forest and everything's the same, then those bark beetle populations are able to just exponentially grow.
And so we knew that we were going to have to work with the communities that are our neighbors right here in the Taylor Canyon in a way that was going to allow us to be as effective as possible and beat the beetles back to the extent that we possibly could. And so we started really 3 conversations almost simultaneously. One was we knew that we weren't going to be able to move as rapidly as we wanted to using the conventional ways that we put contracts together and acquire services in the Forest Service. So we started dialogue with our friends from the National Forest Foundation.
The unique role that the NFF is able to play as a nonprofit organization, we have a lot of flexibility and nimbleness to able to support our partners at the federal and state level. We're also bringing a unique skill set and having project development, administration, budgeting, fundraising, and all of that has really played a critical role in this project to get us to where we are out here running saws, slowing the spread of this beetle.
The second partner that we reach out to is the Colorado State Forest Service.
And in this project, we've been doing a lot of the actual project layout and design, GPSing and timber cruising and making maps. And now we're really heavily focused on doing the project administration. So working day in and day out with the contractor on the ground, with the individual homeowners out here in the communities, the log truck drivers, and making sure that we do everything that we said we were going to do.
Once we figured out what the extent of the outbreak was and where the affected lands were, we started talking to our neighbors. And that includes the Wilder on the Taylor community as well as the Gunnison Highlands community. Each one of those communities had private landowners within them that had affected stands.
You know, as a homeowner, we were really excited to be a partner in this project. The mountain pine beetle is something that none of us really understand, and it can be really a scary process when you're talking about coming in and logging and taking down trees, et cetera. The way that our homeowners looked at it is, this is a safety aspect, but it's also a preservation project. And all we're here to do is just do our part.
With some really frank conversations and some incredible openness from our adjacent neighbors, we were able to move forward. And that's why there's a helicopter in the air today.
Cheeseman, I'm with CRS Timber Product. We're here today doing some emergency mitigation work on some mountain pine beetle. So we're trying to do just a thinning and try to get all of the infected trees off the stand as possible. We're sitting on a large pocket of undisturbed lodgepole pine in this state. It's one of the last large stands of healthy lodgepole pine, and we're hopes of trying to stay ahead of the beetle problem so we don't lose our last green slopes. We're using the helicopter today to try to get to all that steep ground, try not to have the ground disturbance of ground-based activity. It's working pretty good today. We're trying to get about 450 trees off this 78-acre piece in hopes of trying to get this mitigated for this year and knock it down so maybe next year we can get it buttoned up. There you are. You know, this is high intensity, high speed logging right here, 101. This is actually a pretty good landing location compared to some of the ones we do. But hey, it's a proper tool for the job. We're hoping it'll take off and it'll work. And so it's all about the future of our forest. We're losing so much right now. We've lost so many species already in the pine beetle and the spruce beetle, the fir beetle, the budworm. You know, it's anything we can do right now to save what we got left is the most important thing. And projects like this, we hope make a difference. You know, all we can do is try. It's better than throwing your hands up and giving up on it and saying, just let it do its thing.
That doesn't make me feel good. I don't know what will. So that project really illuminated for me what's possible when we work together, when we set aside jurisdictional primacy, when we share mission, share decision-making. We have the opportunity to go big and stay big. And what I'd like to share with you today is that Senator Bennett's congressionally directed spending that was included in the omnibus bill included $3.68 million for the Colorado State Forest Service, of which upwards to $800,000 will fund phase 3 of that project and completely button up our work in the Taylor Canyon. And based on all the surveys that we've done, the analysis inventory, we feel very confident that we've substantially slowed the potential outbreak that would have potentially unraveled the entire lodgepole stands in one of our largest collection areas in the state for water. So it's inspiring to me now. It's like the 500th time I watched that video. And I hope it's inspiring for you now as well. And so with that, I look forward to our conversation. I hope we have some time for some questions.
We do have time. So what are the questions you need answered to take your newfound inspiration into action? We have a panel of experts here. This is your opportunity right here.
So this is for the regional forester. I really did have a really good question, and then you used the term gold medal trout fishing, and it completely threw me, and I forgot my question because the only thing I could think about was gold medal trout fishing. And then I saw the state forester's video, and it reminded me of my question. And by the way, Matt, it seems like you got another jersey for the team there since that video. But go big and stay big reminded me of my question for Frank, and that is, when you look at your projections, both on scope and scale and the magnitude of the problem, what's the elasticity for front loading this if you were to get additional funding? I know there's ramp up and operational constraints, but in your planning horizon and your scope, if Senator Bennett did this and the elected officials did that and the funding mechanisms were there, do you have an opportunity to bring some of that workload forward to front load to attack the magnitude of what's before us? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And really appreciate the question. And one thing I got from that piece is forestry is cool, right?
Forestry is a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing, and it really makes a difference in protecting our watersheds. So to your question, yeah, thank you very much for the question. And we're working, so when I talk about the work we're doing within the funding work that's coming towards us, again, it builds upon work we've been doing, whether it's RMRI or other collaboratives, all across the region, really all across the West. So there's been a lot of work ongoing that will feed into future opportunities. That's one piece. And secondly, we're working on, again, we're focused on the first, initially the first couple of years projects, but we've got a team built within our region that's looking out and working with our forest supervisors across the region. What are those projects? What are those areas we want to focus on in years, whatever it is, 2 through 5 through 7? Yeah, we're building out that work into a 10-year plan and strategy for the region. So yeah, thanks for the question. We're absolutely trying to be prepared, as we were talking about yesterday, be prepared to receive the money. We're doing that same work within the agency.
Hi.
Sonia Chavez.
Sonia Chavez with the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. For Matt and Frank, Matt, thanks so much for all the good work that you did in the Taylor River Basin. That was really a big example of what can happen when you work together. My other question is, we are seeing a lot of recreational impacts on our forest systems. The Taylor River is one of those where we have really wide OHV use. We say that it's called Taylor Dome instead of Thunderdome, like Mad Max Thunderdome, because there are so much recreation OHV vehicle uses that is impacting our wetlands, our riparian areas, illegal roads, trails. What can you do for a small community like us to help us with enforcement on our forest lands?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm not the district ranger in Gunnison anymore. I'm purely focused on forestry, my friend. So I would love for you to take on this multiple use question.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, great question. And so you're absolutely right. You know, through the pandemic, the recreation use has exploded, right? And so we're working with our folks are out there on the ground. We're really trying to have a presence on the ground. How do we expand that? It's a great question. Working with our partners. We're trying to do as much as we can to educate folks when they're out there. I'll tell you what, particularly that first year, we had a lot of folks camping that had no concept of what they were doing. I mean, none. And, I spent time over in Ogden Intermountain region before I came here, and we had folks going to Vegas and then heading to they had no idea what they're doing. So it's just going to take an effort of a lot of us to be there, to be on the ground, to meet people where they're at, and try and give them the tools they need to do the best they can when they're out camping. And the piece we talked about yesterday about campfires, and because most of our fires are human caused, and we just need to continue to enforce that message. When I was a ground pounder, I was out with with our law enforcement officer. I used to do a lot of work in the field in summer and fall, and we came upon a campfire that was abandoned. I mean, they were out hunting, I suppose, and it was died down, but it was still there, and there's this nice 6-pack next to it, and we put it out with the 6-pack. So you do what you can with what you have sometimes.
Yeah, I'm Tim Kylo with Montrose Forest Products, and I just wanted to say to Matt and the Forest Service in general, when you were in the Forest Service, that being a part of the Taylor Park Initiative and that 4 very, very hectic months of collaboration to get that project going was probably the most amazing thing that I have been involved with in terms of collaboration and 40 years of being in forestry. And this is just a comment. Without Matt McCombs, that would not have come together, and his drive and initiative, and without the backing of the region. I mean, it was just almost joyous to work with the Forest Service, which was the first in my career, and we'll take care of the recreational folks when the log trucks start running. So that's not, but using that template as a guide for future management, plus what we're seeing in the Salt River Project and in Denver Water, is really inspiring to me personally as a forester, but also I think to all of us, that we can go big, we can expand this kind of programs on a larger landscape, and really, and with the proof of the Taylor Initiative, we can do it quickly. So it's just a comment. And thank you to all 4 of you for your hard work and effort. Thank you.
One more question.
I might just add a comment. That's what, this is what inspires me. I want this to be the Colorado way. That in this leadership role that I've now assumed, that taking those experiences to scale is really what we're trying to achieve. And I can tell you, in that basin, the relationships between the State Forest Service, private landowners, county governments, the environmental community, U.S. Forest Service, and BLM, there's a great deal of trust and familiarity. And they see each other differently. Their instincts and how they engage with each other are different. And that we're hoping to double down with that across the entire state of Colorado for certain, and try to create space for people to sort of let down again those organizational boundaries that exist and see each other as resources that they can activate in this time of crisis. And so it's a great story to tell, and it truly is a story of everything working. And we're going to continue to engage employees and engage communities in a way that tries to create an organizational culture that this is just the way we do business.
And I was going to add, thank you. And what we talk a lot about in the agency, wanting to be an employer of choice, we also want to be a partner of choice. So I appreciate what you said. And we don't want to be the enemy or the bad guy. I sat down yesterday at the table and somebody said, glad you're here, Forest Service. We like to keep our friends close and our enemies closer. And, smile. But we really do want to work together. And any barriers that have been there in the past, hopefully for whatever reason, I'm hopeful that we can work through those and be really strong partners going forward. Thanks.
So one more, Chris?
Yeah, plenty of time.
Okay.
And you all know from yesterday, you don't want to leave questions to me, so.
Is it on?
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes. Thank you. I'm Tim Redmond, newly elected Routt County Commissioner, member Club 20. One of my concerns is as we're moving forward, when we've had these fires and we have all this sedimentation, what is that doing to our rivers and our reservoirs? And you're saying you're looking 300 years out. What can we do to protect ourselves in that situation?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I think that gets to more of thinking holistically about the watershed. So certainly the sessions yesterday talked about beaver dam analogs and riparian restoration. I think there is, you can't put all your eggs in one basket, basically. That's kind of been my approach for the program at Denver Water is, yes, wildfire risk is our #1 risk, but watersheds are complex. And so, for instance, abandoned mines, how do fires impact that? Get into the sediment and then into the rivers and then to your reservoir. So it's such a complex issue, but I think that's always my biggest takeaway is not to put all your eggs in one basket. Think about planning for when there's a fire. Think about post-fire recovery. Think about making your good watersheds more resilient or how you can protect that currently. So it's dependent upon the unique watershed and the circumstances. But I think having multiple options, like we've funded with Aurora Water, a stream restoration. And that has saved a lot of sediment from coming downstream to Strontia Springs. And actually in this next agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, we're looking at funding not just typical forest treatments, wildfire risk reduction, but we're also looking at stream restorations, riparian plantings, and more ecological solutions, specifically upstream of Strontia Springs Reservoir on the Pike National Forest. So I hope that answers your question.
I'll also jump in real quickly. So on the smallest watershed that we're actually going to begin thinning soon, we did a cost benefit analysis. It's a 64,000 acre watershed with about 37,000 acres worth of treatment on it. We did the cost benefit analysis that if there were to be a catastrophic wildfire that would come through the smallest of our watersheds, you're looking at about $293 million in damage, not only to the water infrastructure, to our downstream water users that would no longer be able to use that water, but also in post-wildfire mitigation efforts to help restore some of that landscape. And comparison, it's going to cost about 50 to 60 million just to thin that watershed. So there is a huge difference in terms of economics and being preventative. The other thing I would mention when it comes to sediment into streams and reservoirs, and what we have been noticing is that the danger really is during the monsoon season when you have intense precipitation events, and it sends a huge slug of this type of material into the streams, the lakes, and the reservoirs at very fast rates. And when you have very steep canyons where people like to recreate, what we have noticed is that there are property losses of life in these huge post-wildfire flooding events that are very dangerous to everyone. And then what SRP has been doing to help with that is that we've been installing what we call photography. It's cameras with gauges. And so that way I've been implementing these on some of these burn scars. So that way we can have advanced notification of when this slug of material is going to be coming in, and we can also send out alerts to not only the Forest Service but also to our partner cities to let them know that this material, this type of water quality degradation is going to occur and that they can prepare for it.
Got one here, Chris.
Good. Also a reminder for those of you online, you can put a question in the chat and Brittany will relay that. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm John Twitchell with the Colorado State Forest Service. And I guess, Frank, I guess this question will be to you. This has been very inspiring, and having lived and still living through the aftermath of the beetle epidemic, Matt, that's incredible. You got the NEPA through, because one of the frustrations, in the early 2000s was we would identify where the beetles were, knew we had to get them. It was at least a 3-year. It was 3 years down the line before the process followed through. And by then the beetles had moved to the next stand and we were always chasing our tails. And I work for the state, but we worked with our federal partners. So my question is this, and I haven't heard much of it, in the last couple of days. To go big, how do we scale up NEPA in a way, because that's key to what we need to do. And we can't just keep going project to project. Lava was inspiring. A lot of that landscape burned up in the Mullen fire, but how can we take those lessons without undercutting NEPA, understanding the integrity of the law, but applying it in a much more efficient way that allows us as land managers to get our jobs done?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so a couple of things here. One, we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, whether it's categorical exclusions. We have a lot of categorical exclusions that can apply, but also we can do streamlined environmental assessments that can be done quicker. And I'm curious, I want to give Matt a chance to respond too about exactly what you use to get that done in 4 months. But the other thing is we got to do our projects, you're right, at bigger scale. I mean, like 80,000 acre scale instead of 5,000 acre scale. If you just do the math to do the type of work we're talking about, 20 million acres over 10 years, you divide that out, kind of like what you did with your 14 cents per customer. We just have to do, we have to look at projects on a much broader scale, even if we're not going to treat all 80,000 or whatever we're doing, but the landscape you're looking at is larger and you identify treatments within there, you get the project done, the decision done, and then you implement as you get funding. But Matt, tell me how you got to that done in 4 months.
Farm Bill CE.
There you go.
It was
one of our tools.
It was identified in the governor's declaration. It was already mapped. We met the exact criteria for which the categorical exclusion was designed, and we engaged with a sense of urgency, and we leveraged every single voice in the room. And we did, Sam Pankratz, the forester from the State Forest Service, we ensured that we did what we said we were going to do, and that builds confidence and it demonstrates our competence. And that's extremely valuable to the community. And it put in my mind this idea that success begets success. Now the Gunnison Basin knows that they can go big, and it's hopeful, right, that they can stay big. And I'd add to that following that CU, it dovetails with a environmental assessment that the district led that analyzed 240,000 acres, cleared 22,000 acres of treatment to include 4,000 acres of stand replacement fire in 18 months. It's possible, but it takes a will and it takes courage, but it also takes community support in a way that allows people to step out and manage risk effectively. Because there are folks in this world that don't necessarily agree that forestry is a beautiful thing in practice. And so we've got to meet them where they are and engage them in ways that are meaningful and authentic, and help them acknowledge that their voices are equally important in the conversation, and that we make commitments as it relates to best management practices, as it relates to the type of impacts that we're honest, and that we live up to our word, and we demonstrate that we're capable of doing what we said we were going to do, and be a reliable return on investment.
Elvy?
So I'd just like to add on that in Arizona, we have the Forest Restoration Initiative, very similar to what you all have here. And I would say that landscape scale NEPA planning is something that we have been very successful for. So we, in our area, we were able to issue the first landscape EIS And that one was for 500,000 acres. And we just recently did another round of EIS, and that one is for approximately 900,000 acres. And so I think are kind of a platform to understand how you can do landscape scale EIS NEPA analysis and have those treatments available. I can tell you it takes a long time. It's very painful. Collaboration is not easy, and it requires everybody to come to the table to work together, but it is an example of how that collaboration can achieve landscape scales.
I thought Christina's 300-year planning horizon was because of the EIS process.
I was just going to add one more thing real quick. The other thing we can look at is programmatic adaptive, environmental analysis, so that if a condition change, you've already got the NEPA done and you can implement the project.
And that's what that Taylor EA was, a conditions back. Frank, I may or may not have advanced NEPA in conditions-based NEPA before the NEPA reform was done. But another thing is that we leveraged one of the reasons I applied for this job, and is because I kind of fell deeply in love with the State Forest Service through that project. This unique capacity that the state has, that when the feds show up and say, "Hi, I'm here to help, and I'm from the federal government," it's not always as well received as you might think. It's very strange. But at the same time, when the State Forest Service shows up and says, "Hi, I'm Sam. I've been in the community for this many years, and I happen to know all of you. I've been working with your neighbors for for years and years with successful projects." It just is a different, they're received just differently. And so letting each, and maybe it's a nonprofit partner, maybe it's a utility, that's coming forward and saying, "Hey, this is critically important to your watershed." That message and the way it's delivered is extremely important. So let those voices that are best suited to advance the mission be the ones that are the voices in the room. And again, that's sharing in decision space, sharing some of the primacy that we have over our roles in this world. In a way that allows us to put our best foot forward when we're trying to move expeditiously in a crisis mindset.
Great lessons. Great question. Thank you. Brittany, we have somebody online that has a question.
Yes. Pickens County Commissioner Steve Child asks, when you are logging to control bark beetles, what do you do with the slash and bark? Do you mulch it, which I think would kill the beetles, and put the organic matter back into the ground? Do you haul any to waste to power plants to burn? Or do you burn the slash piles? I'm thinking about what would be the most effective for killing the beetles while having the least carbon footprint.
But the great story, at least as it relates to that Taylor project, was that the majority of it went to the mill and it was turned into dimensional lumber. It's now the carbon is captured and the beetles are dead. And so, I mean, that's the best way that we leverage industry, is that is by using that unique tool that's available to us. And the Ponzi, I want to come back. Like I love the Ponzi system. Like you are going to see more than 2 machines in the state of Colorado. That I guarantee, because that steep slope work is the most important work. And so leveraging all of the unique tools that industry can bring to the table to achieve those objectives as it relates to arresting infestation and the impacts, but also capturing the carbon in usable fiber products. They benefit the people here in Colorado, but certainly across the country as well.
Steve, Commissioner Child's question raises a question I had. You've talked about cost benefit and return on investment. You've talked about the value goals, and the benefits are apparent. What is the carbon calculation of forest health and forest thinning and the work that's being done? I mean, what is the sequestration versus liberation calculation is that done?
That's a great question. I don't have a great answer for it, to be honest with you, but it's work that we need to be digging into, because it helps tell the story. Climate change is a major focus of this administration, and I think we can do more work around that piece. I did some work in that area 10, 12 years ago. It's been a minute, but yeah, it's an area that maybe you can speak to a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So we have undertaken a number of carbon modeling scenarios, primarily for that smallest watershed. That's my all-time favorite. And there are different modeling techniques out there that can be used. And I like to explain to some of our partners about, they're always like, well, you're removing trees, you're reducing the carbon stock. How are you actually saving net or creating net positive benefits. And I said, well, the first piece is that you're actually avoiding the wildfire. So that big release of carbon and the decaying material that occurs after that. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that you are allowing for the healthier, more resilient trees to grow stronger and bigger over time. The third piece is that the material from those forest restoration projects are actually going to industry products that store the carbon in those type of products. And then the final piece is what we call delayed regeneration, which is that we know when you have a high severity fire, that the likelihood of that forest to return to its original state is very unlikely. And especially in some of these transitional vegetation zones where we're seeing increasing temperatures, it's not returning back to pine forest. And so when you add all those up, there is actually a net carbon benefit over a 40-year life cycle. And so one of the examples is we worked with the National Forest Foundation on a carbon modeling project where they estimated that there's about 25.9 tons of CO2 benefits per acre of restoration on some of our watersheds.
I'm gonna have you say that into my phone later. That was the most comprehensive answer I've heard actually anywhere. That was fantastic. Ladies.
That was
let's give
really
her a round
good.
of applause. I mean, that's it.
And thanks for
do
the
this a lot.
save. Yeah, thanks for the save. That was really good.
Yeah, well, I would just say, so that's a key question. And, we're in dialogue with the Nature Conservancy and others here in the state of Colorado where, carbon accounting is important and it gives us credibility. And so we are working, but one of the benefits of being nested in the Warner College of Natural Resources at CSU is we have incredible access to a lot of fresh young minds and old crusty, wise minds. And so we're trying to work with grad students. In fact, we just launched a project 3 weeks ago with a couple of grad students and doctoral students to try to build the very first layer of a carbon accounting tool that we'd be able to apply to projects that we do in Colorado. They would demonstrate what the trade-offs and the benefits are with forest management as it relates to carbon. So we're moving down that path as well. And I'm going to be getting them in contact with you.
Another question out there? You've been warned. If you don't, I've got more.
Matt, I don't know if it's wise, but from a crusty old mind, it's one of those things. I know we got some additional speakers coming up, but I just don't want us to leave this room without really taking in this moment in time. And that is, I really think that there's a strong opportunity, given the partnerships and the leaderships up on that stage, that we look at this sense of urgency and we look at this will that's being demonstrated. And all of us in this room, there's a lot of political clout that can't be lost on this moment in time, because I think we're off to a great start. And I think we've got a good foundation, but I think we need to see sustainability as it pertains to funding and commitment. And where Senator Bennett talked about that, the Chief of the Forest Service is committed, the Regional Forester is committed, but these are down payments in terms of the future. So we just have a wonderful opportunity to sustain this through the state and federal partnerships. And we all have a responsibility in this room to lean into it to make sure we don't lose this momentum. So.
Well said. Thank you. Cindy Dozier has a question. Make me walk.
Merritt and I are the long and the short of it for sure. So here's my question, and it regards something that Elvy said about cost benefit analysis. And in your planning process, as part of your reporting, do you talk about cost per acre to deal with a wildfire as opposed to the cost per acre to deal with management that would prevent or reduce the catastrophic nature of the wildfire? I think we've had so many fires now, and you see millions and millions and millions of dollars spent not only on fighting the fire, but on the recovery process. Has somebody calculated all of that and then looked at forest management as in the cost benefit analysis piece to reduce cost?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so to make So SRP, we have a forest health goal, and our goal is to help support the thinning of 500,000 acres by 2035. In order for our leadership to move forward with that sustainability goal, we had to do extensive analysis that looked at many different aspects and how you quantify the benefits of watershed restoration and forest restoration. So looking at the differences by doing preventative treatments versus the catastrophic nature of what could happen and comparing the differences in economics there. We also looked at the economic development opportunities. When you invest in restoration, there are jobs created, there are markets created, and there are additional tax benefits to the local communities that come from that. And then we also compared it on how when investing in our forest and also our forest product industry that is needed to implement these treatments. We looked at it from an investment where we not only have to invest in the projects up front, so getting the treatments done up front, but we also need to be investing in our infrastructure and our industry, because that's where you get a lot of your cost efficiency savings. You could be paying $2,000, $3,000 per acre, but if you have a healthy forest product industry, those costs could potentially come down and you get a lot of cost savings for that. And one of the reasons we went, examples of how we invested in our forest product industry is we passed a state tax credit law. It was called the Healthy Forest Production Tax Credit, where we actually say forest product industry, for the amount of tons that you chew through every year and create commercially marketable products, we will pay you, I think it was $10,000 for every, I think it was, 2,000, or I forget the differences, but we start at $10,000, it goes up to $500,000, and it's for them to chew through tonnage every single year. And it's an investment in them to not only increase their capacity, but also to attract new industry to Arizona. So that was one example of how we are investing in our industry.
Thank you. We're going to allow you to be the last word so we don't step on the Congresswoman's time. Please join me in thanking Frank, Elvy, Christina, and Matt